So, welcome all tonight. Glad to see you all for tonight's meeting. And the first part of the meeting, we're going to be talking about diets, pet diets, and nutrition a bit. It's an area of expertise that I've had for many, many years. I Before I developed my expertise with cannabis and many other supplements, including mushrooms, diet was the first place I started when I started to offer um, 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 holistic consulting to my clients. And back then, we didn't have all the resources that you guys have now as far as all these commercially available diets. There just was the Kibble that was out there. And so I developed um, a protocol for teaching people how to prepare homemade diets for their pets in their home with raw or with cooked foods. I don't think that it's that big a deal one way or the other, as long as they're minimally processed and good quality food. And I was the first. I think I was one of the first. I was the first one of the first veterinary clinic, definitely in Colorado, but one of the few in the country that we got a freezer in my clinic where we started carrying some of these commercially available raw foods. And I was actually pretty glad when I saw that the marketplace was starting to provide those, because it really took a lot of time for me in my exam room to just to explain to people how to make the right diet for their pet, and I'd make the diet specifically for each specific pet. And it's something I still can do, but it is quite time consuming. These days they've got computer apps and things that I can use to make things simpler. So that's what we're going to do tonight as the teaching part, and I think we may just do a couple more of these live events talking about nutrition. Um, I know that in my practice, especially when my cancer patients would come in and I would ask them what are their goals in coming to see me, almost always the first thing they would ask for would be, well, I would like to get a good diet for my pet. And so diet, I think, is really important. The food you feed, not just important for the health of the animal, but it's also, I think, really important to the pet parent. And I think it's more than just the food that's being fed. I think it's also the act of feeding your pets. I think there's a real nurturing action there. I think that's really almost prime to the whole relationship that we have with our pets, is that feeding time. And when you think about it, dogs 60,000 years ago, wild dogs, that was really what attracted them to hang out around the camps of of these early humans, was that they were going to wind up being able to be fed from the scraps that were left over, in their campsites. And so feeding, food and feeding are two really important things to the relationship that we have with our pets. So, that being said, let's just talk a little bit about, as usual, as we get started up here with our housekeeping information. I'm going to let Haley start with that. Haley, why don't you get started, and then I'll chime back in again.
Sure.
I just wanted to credit Haley. Haley is just so wonderful to work with. I think she's brilliant, and she crafts those incredible weekly campaigns. She writes the content too. I edit it and go back and make sure everything's medically correct. But most of the time, it's one and done. She puts them together and they're just beautiful. So we really need to give Haley an awful lot of credit for what she does. So anyway, that being said, Haley, it's it's your turn.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And you are wonderful to work with as well. Thank you, thank you. So for our housekeeping tonight, we do have questions from email that we will use. If you didn't get a chance to send me the question via email, feel free to put them in the chat and we will get to those as well. We definitely plan on answering all of your questions, no matter how long it takes. We'll see if there are common threads to questions. For instance, when the same question is being asked by several people, these questions have first priority. And please raise your hand if you don't understand what is being said. We definitely want everyone to learn and benefit from this time together.
And I have to say that I want to be able to help everybody, but I am limited by my ability to give the perfect answer to your question, because We don't have a doctor-patient relationship. That would need to have physical presence, which is of course impossible in this virtual situation, where I actually physically examine your cat, listen to the heart, take the temperature, look in the ears, look at the mouth, those kinds of things. And I don't have your pet's complete history or copies of diagnostic tests, so I'll do my best to answer your questions in a way that can be educational and perhaps point you in the right direction. But please understand the limitations that are inherent in this platform. And we can follow up later through email. My email address, I should have put it there. I think we have it someplace else. It's that questions at wellpethelp.com. That's the best way to reach me. And I do my very best to answer every single question that comes in, which sometimes can take several hours every morning. So, and then let's go to the next slide. And so just to give you an overview for those of you who haven't been here before, that we offer these live events on the fourth Thursday of each month at the same time. Although every once in a while, due to like holidays or things like that, we have to modify when that is. We record them live, and we do post the recording on the website, so you'll be able to get a copy of it if you have to leave early or fall asleep, or something like that. Plus, the slides that we're showing today, and the slides we show every day, those are also going to be made available to you as well. So you don't have to scribble crazily and take notes and things. You can just kind of sit back in your easy chair and let the educational words just bathe all over you. I have written this book for those of you that don't know about it, called There's a Mushroom for That. And that's basically the reference text for these live events, and also for my ongoing health mentoring, for pet parents. You can order it through Amazon, and it's been on Amazon for like a year and a quarter. I've just lowered the price to $25 from $35. So if you haven't gotten one yet, it's a good deal. Or you want to give one as a gift to someone, another good idea. And if you send me the Amazon receipt, we'll send you a discount coupon for 2 times. And thank you for doing that. And we're thinking about maybe offering another live hour, or doing some more types of events like this, maybe bringing in some people and doing some interviews, making it kind of podcast live like. I've also been thinking about doing some paid for medical consultations with people. I do answer a lot of medical consultations. I don't ask for anything in return. But they're getting to be more and more of them, and my time is getting to be less and less, and so I'm thinking about doing that. Your feedback as far as if that's something that you would think would be a good thing, something you might be interested in, please let us know. Trying to figure out how to charge for that, that's always a slippery slope. My thought was kind of charge it out of 15-minute increments, and I was thinking charging maybe $50 for each increment. It's not just the $50 for 15 minutes, because normally I'm going to have to review your medical records and keep records myself so I can go back to it. So it's not really that transactional that it's $50 for 50 minutes. There's a lot more into it than that. But anyway, that's for another time to go into. And so tonight, our topic is nutrition basics, and the brilliant Haley, in her newsletter, really, I thought, brought up some really good categories that are worth talking about. And so I've got slides made up to work on each of these. And for those of you who haven't muted yourselves, could you please, because we can all sort of hear background noise, and that makes it difficult for us to learn. So we want to learn how to recognize the basic qualities of a sound diet for dogs and cats. That's going to be one slide and one discussion. We want to know about ways to improve your pet's current food, even if you're not ready to change everything all at once. And we want to talk about when fresh, raw, or home-prepared diets might be helpful for your pet, and what to look for in that regards. I want to talk about what are some key nutrients and supplements that I often add for skin, gut, joint, and immune source. And we do offer some of those, and we'll shamelessly market them to you, let you know what they are, and give you links so you can pick them up if you want them. And we do offer a discount coupon each time you attend these lives to make the cost easier for you. And then some common feeding mistakes. I think I even added another slide in there as well. So we'll just let's just kind of get going and take the next slide here. And so I wanted to start with, basically, dogs and cats aren't the same. Cats aren't just little dogs. Dogs are omnivores. They basically can eat anything. They need about half the amount of protein that cats need. So, when diets are being made, we need to make sure the diets are very protein rich for cats, and that protein really needs to be mostly animal protein. It's really difficult to feed a cat in a vegan way, and I really question, if that really fits into what what their biology is. Dogs could be fed vegan, but again, they are meat eaters, and I do think that they should get some meat in their diet. But people have very strong beliefs, and if it matches your belief to have your dog be fed this way, then you have to be very careful to make sure that they get all the nutrients they need. And there are some good books I can recommend that do a good job of telling you how to make a vegan diet for your dog. For your cat, I really don't recommend that. But cats need mostly protein and fats, and these percentages are just approximate, just to kind of give you an idea that, with cats, protein should be, 3/4 of the diet or even the entire diet, Fats are good for cats, unless they're really fat cats, in which case they need to be healthier fats, but they can take quite a bit of them. The vegetables aren't really part of a nutritional need, but they really help to work in terms of fiber. They help pass those hairballs. They help to firm the stools better. Plus, many vegetables have these micronutrients that are really healthy for cats, for people, for dogs, gerbils, for any animal. Cats don't need carbohydrates. There's really no nutritional need for them. They don't really have the enzymes, but they love carbohydrates. I mean, my cats will eat potato chips. That doesn't, just because they like something doesn't mean it's necessarily good for them, and I think we all recognize that rule, applies to us as well. Cats do have a requirement for an amino acid called taurine, which is found in most meats in pretty good levels. Tuna fish, by the way, is a really good source of taurine, and probably the highest level of taurine is found in mice. So if your cat's a mouser, then certainly they're getting their taurine that way. Cats also have some specific needs for B vitamins, different than dogs do, in particular B3 and B12. B12 is usually an animal-based B vitamin, and they also need minerals like potassium and sodium, but because of the potential risk they have with bladder crystals and stones, the amount of minerals that they receive can be important. Dogs don't need as much protein, but it depends on what their health status is, because in some cases dogs will do better with higher protein diets, and in some cases they might need lower protein diets. When kidneys start to be flagging in terms of their ability to remove toxins from the body, we look at lowering the protein a little bit, because the nitrogen waste that protein metabolism creates is one of the big toxins that kidneys have trouble eliminating from the body. Dogs don't really have a need for carbohydrates, but carbohydrates are much better for them. What's interesting is wild dogs, and prehistoric dogs didn't have enzymes to digest carbohydrates. But after 60,000 years of dogs, living in the presence of humans and eating a lot of the waste that humans don't eat, much of which might be carbohydrates, we've found genetically that dogs have actually learned, actually now have enzymes that allow them to digest carbohydrates, whereas before they weren't able to. And dogs need fats. Fats aren't bad. Fats don't really put the weight on. It's the carbohydrates that do, especially the simple carbohydrates like sugar. So that's kind of gives you the kind of big picture, about feeding the animals. And what are the basic qualities of a sound diet for dogs and cats? Well, the kinds of things you want to look for in a diet, we'd like to feed the highest quality ingredients that we can afford to as well. I mean, it can be costly to feed some of these home prepared meals, much more costly than just buying a bag of kibble and just throwing that in the bowl. so many diets, the kibble diets and the canned diets, they're processed at high temperatures and high pressures. And those high temperatures and pressures cause the ingredients in the food, the molecular structure of the ingredients of the food to change, and changes many of them into pro-inflammatory compounds or glycotoxins, as it might be. So we want to have the food be as minimally processed as possible. That's one reason everybody's kind of adopted this whole raw feeding thing. And they kind of, this pendulum's kind of swung, because, for years we're feeding these highly processed commercial foods, they're processed at high temperatures and pressures. And then, with the pet food recall in 2007, that kind of changed so many pet parents' minds. And so they started looking for the exact opposite, which is raw food, which is, minimally processed, which is great, but it's not necessarily the gold standard any more than the kibble is. I think each animal deserves to get the food that's appropriate for them, but we have to remember that our budgets might be limited, our time and our motivation might be limited in terms of whether we're going to be preparing food for them at home, how much money we can actually spend on their diet. So I say, although there are some ideals as far as food, that we really need to be practical about it. We need to feed the best quality food that our budget can afford. And that may just be one of the so-called better kibbles. I think it's an oxymoron to use the word good kibble, because I think they are just so highly processed. Oxymorons would be like jumbo shrimp, or military intelligence, good kibble. But it might be that kibble's the only thing you can feed, and I'll talk about that in the next slide, because there are things you can add to the kibble that I think can kind of help supplement what the kibble's not providing, and also help with antioxidants for the highly processing of the kibble, which can create reactive oxidative species and things like that. We want the diet to be species specific. I explained the difference between dog food and cat food. And it can also be life stage specific. Puppies, they need more. They need more protein. But if they're a giant breed like a Great Dane or a Saint Bernard, or one of those Mastiffs, you don't want to feed them too much protein. You don't want to feed them too rich a diet, because it makes their bones grow more quickly, and then they get these developmental bone diseases. So you have to feed these giant breeds a little less, and then when they become adults, there's they're more they're out. They need a different level of protein and different levels of carbs and nutrients. And of course, when they're seniors, their need for protein may be a little less, and so you don't want to have as much nitrogen waste being eliminated if they're not using the protein. So each life stage could also need a specific diet. And so the pet food companies, they're no fools. They know how to make $1 trillion industry move. And so so that's why they have these diets that are adapted to different breeds or adapted to different lifestyles. It's good marketing, and I don't think it's that bad a concept. I just don't like the format of the food. I think it's just too processed to feed nothing but that exclusively. The other thing, and what's interesting, is when we found this out in the dog aging project, which they're studying why do dogs age and how do dogs age, and and what can we do to slow down that aging process so they can live longer with us. And one of the things they found was that hydration, that problems with getting enough fluids in their system is a big problem. And one reason is kibble is like uber dry, So that's something to think about as well. When I have to feed kibble to Ollie, and I do as well, I'll admit there's times when I do, I soak it first, so it's already hydrated for him, and it maybe takes 15 or 20 minutes to soak, and I'll add vegetables and things. I'll talk about what I do. So there's a lot of diet choices out there. Let me go through them. So the kibble and the can, those are the ones that are ultra processed, and that's the big problem that we're hearing about. Our American diet, it's all very ultra processed, and we need to eat less processed foods. And same for our pets, but it's easy. Industrial agriculture and the whole food industry, it's cheap and easy for them to make ultra processed foods. They can sell them to us at a price that we can afford. They're very, very tasty. They're almost addictive. So, just be aware of that. We have some of these loaves of food that are cooked food. It's like real meat and real vegetables, the real carbohydrates. And I think those are pretty good, depending on what the nutrient profile is of the food. You also can get this dehydrated food, food that's already been cooked and raw, or food that is cooked and dehydrated, or raw and dehydrated, just add water. I think those can be pretty good, and they've got decent shelf life, but I do think with those, I recommend adding some fresh food to it as well. Maybe some chopped up vegetables, maybe some healthy meat, and definitely add some good oils, healthy oils, and things like that to it. Raw freeze dried food. It's raw food, but it is processed to get it freeze dried. It's pretty good, but it's not the same as real raw food. Um, so it's on the list. It's certainly better than dry ultra processed or canned ultra processed. And then we have commercially prepared cooked or raw diets, like maybe you've heard about the farmer's diet or something like that. I think I forget what the exact name. So those can be pretty good. In fact, that's what I'm in the process of doing. Is I'm checking out a lot of these different diets, and I'm going to offer them on my website. Now I can't really store all these frozen diets in my shipping center and have them shipped out. So we work with these companies, and so we are able to do like an affiliate program where you can order them through our website and get a discount, and the company will directly ship to you. We already carry one raw frozen diet called Chi Dog and Chi Cat, which is created based on traditional Chinese medicine energetics. They've got a fire diet and a water diet and a earth diet, and so on. Um, so those are pretty good, but they can be pricey. It depends what your budget is, but not bad to have in a pinch. When there's just not enough time to provide a food. Um, there's dried body parts, right? So there's some companies that sell things like rabbit's feet or pig's ears that have hair on them, things like that, spleens that have been dried or livers that have been dried. These can be pretty good augmentations to the diet. The dogs like them, the cats like them, and they have hair on them, which is a form of animal fiber, which can also help improve their bowel and digestive process. And there's a number of companies that provide them. You can provide them as treats, but they provide good nourishment because they are from an animal, and they're all dried, and they provide some chewing and some enrichment of their food. Table scrap diet. Now that's something I used to teach. In Boulder, a lot of people, they're foodies. They really prepare a lot of healthy food for themselves at their own table. And if I have a conversation with a client who does that and prepares really good food for themselves, I can tell them how much of each portion of food, carbohydrate, protein, vegetable, they should feed their dog that they could take from what they're fixing each day. That's really one of the most efficient ways to go. But I select who I teach this to, because not everybody is going to be responsible for that. And if you remember the telephone game, where you sit around in a circle and somebody whispers a word to somebody at the beginning of the circle and everybody whispers it to everybody else, by the time you get to the end, that word changes. That's what we call recipe drift. So that's when we give a recipe to a pet parent to do, and then a year later you say, well, so let's see, you're giving half a cup of this and a quarter cup of that, and they, oh, well, no, actually I changed that, and I'm doing, and so recipes have to be maintained fairly regularly and precisely in order to be certain that you're providing the same nourishment, each time. But table scrap diet is something I could discuss at some point in time. Home prepared diets can be great. They take work and they take preparation. They're not necessarily that easy. You can batch prepare and freeze and thaw out. That makes it easier. But they do have to be based on, using a veterinary nutritional approach, a veterinary recipe, because you can't just throw foods at your animals haphazardly according to what you think they like. We need to provide them with food that matches what their biological needs are. So that's what the last thing was. Home prepared diets just fed based on thinking. Oh, and by the way, I just wanted to introduce a very special guest tonight. My sister is here tonight, BJ with her new cat, and she's been asking me about feeding her new cat, Onyx. She's had two older cats that both unfortunately passed away this past year, and now she feels like she wants to provide the best quality diet for her new cat. And so I'm going to get on the phone with her over this weekend or something. But I said, why don't you come join us tonight, and maybe maybe you'll learn something too. So say hi to everybody, Barb, or BJ. And there she is. There's Barb. Okay, now let's go to the next slide. So, how about ways to improve your pet's current food? Let's say you're not ready to change everything at once, and this is what I was referring to. Well, you can. That's where this use of supplements can be really helpful to take, a boring dry food that's ultra processed and to add life to it. Things like fish oil, medium chain triglycerides, flaxseed meal is and these superfoods like flaxseed meal and nutritional yeast, kelp powder, seaweed. I think these are awesome, and what's great about them, like flaxseed meal, it's got a great source of omega-3s, a good source of fresh omega-6s, but it also has all of this soluble and insoluble fiber, and flaxseed also contains these things called lignans. And the lignans are known to actually bind up toxins, including some of these rogue estrogens that are created by our metabolism, by the metabolism of your pets, that can cause cancer and other problems. So I'm big on these superfoods. They're inexpensive. You don't have to buy them from some pet store or something. You can go and buy them in bulk online or buy them at your health food store and just add them, according to your pet's weight and need. Yeast is really, the nutritional yeast, really rich in trace minerals and great B vitamins, glucose tolerance factor, and yeast has a nice cheesy taste to it. And there's some companies like Green Juju, for instance, is one company that's provide, and will probably be carrying their stuff too, that has a bunch of different foods that are already dehydrated vegetables that you can add that provide a lot of green food. We're seeing a lot of fermented vegetables, and we're seeing things, even fermented mushrooms, as forms of probiotics are also being provided. Green Juju is one company that does that. Digestive enzymes can help your animal to digest that highly processed kibble that's dry. Probiotics, very important, and many of these ultra-processed foods really mess up the microbiome, so we need to do the best we can to restore the health of the microbiome using fermented vegetables and probiotics, healthy fresh foods. The food you feed helps to create a healthy microbiome, a healthy balance of the microorganisms that govern your health in your bowel. Also, you can provide some fresh foods from your own table if they're healthy. Veggies you could pretty much give almost any veggies at all, if your pet will eat them, chop them up finely and mix them in. Great sources of micronutrients and fiber. And meats as well. You don't want to feed an awful lot of it, maybe 10% to 15% total of what you're doing, because you don't want to unbalance what you're feeding. But a little bit is good, and a little bit every day is good. So that's what you can do. And if you are ready to make big changes, okay, that's good. You're motivated. I would go back to slide 1 and choose that food that's less processed and appropriate for your pet system. There's a lot of nutrition, a lot of health, holistic health coaches these days that are more than happy to counsel you as far as how to prepare a fresh food. There's veterinarians who are nutritionists. There's veterinarians who are able to do that, who aren't nutritionists. So there's a lot of resources out there. You shouldn't try to do it yourself, because you really need to do it from the point of knowing what your pet's nutritional needs are and how you can fulfill them best. All right, next slide is, and when fresh, raw, or home-prepared diets may be helpful. So, obesity, we're having an obesity epidemic in the world right now, mainly because so many people eat these ultra-processed foods, which just pack it on you, and cause other problems as well. Skin problems, certainly going to an improved diet can help to improve the skin markedly. Digestive problems, oftentimes it's the food itself, the highly processed kibble and that can be creating these digestive problems, and oftentimes when we go to fresh foods, we can clear it up right away. Diabetes, although if they have diabetes, you have to be careful how you're feeding it, but especially cats who have a type 2 diabetes. I've seen many cats that have converted from being diabetic to being normal just by feeding them no carbohydrates. Cat's kibble is like 50% carbohydrates, way more kibble than any cat needs. So by feeding them fresh food, or feeding them food that's higher in protein, no carbs, we can reverse type 2 diabetes in many cats. Cancer certainly is when I think diet becomes very, very important. And we find that higher protein diets that have high levels of medium chain triglycerides that become ketogenic in nature can help to reduce the growth of the cancer. Likewise with epilepsy, we find that ketogenic diets can help to reduce the epileptic seizures. Certainly senior animals who are aging, most senior animals are aging, I guess that was kind of dumb, but they have special needs as well, and especially as they get older, they have specific needs with specific problems that arise as they age, where diets can be specifically formulated to address those needs. And really, any kind of chronic disease. I believe very strongly in the value of fresh, wholesome foods being home prepared, but it's not for everyone. And it does take time, and it does take motivation, and it does take an attention to detail. That being said, for the last 25 or 30 years, every dog I've had, I feed them every meal from scratch. And I feed raw meat because for me it just takes too long to cook it. It's easier, but it could just easily be cooked food. And I feed raw meat, raw vegetables, and then a bunch of fiber and oils and things like that. Okay, so key nutrients, and is this the last one? I thought this was going to be the last. So somehow I didn't make this was supposed to. Okay, let me go. Sorry. Oh, okay, never mind. I'll just go here anyway. So yeah, I screwed up, didn't I, Haley? So what we're going to do, though, is we're going to send you a copy of these slides. And Haley's going to add a slide that has each of these products. These are products we carry on our website. And yes, this is shameless marketing, but why not? Everybody does it these days, and then links to these products. So if this is of interest to you and you're looking for stuff like this, it makes it easier for you to find it, and you could use the discount we're giving to purchase them, but things like my daily dog and functional feline, which are mushroom blends that also have adaptogens and probiotics and krill meal and nutritional yeast in them, and very tasty. Those are good places to start. The RX Biotic is a probiotic that I designed 25 years ago. It still works pretty good. Nutritional support for dogs and cats is the first product I ever formulated 30 years ago, and it's got a bunch of kelp powder and nutritional yeast and liver powder and a bunch of herbs, and I think it's still one of the best formulas out there. Dogs and cats who have poor doing hair coat that are on Kibble that start on that and start on a fish oil program, we've noticed like within 2 weeks their hair coat seems to improve markedly. If you're doing homemade diet, I've also prepared special supplements to use. When you do mix all those foods together, we need to make sure that your dog or your cat's getting enough calcium. Meat is really high in phosphorus, and if we feed too much phosphorus, it can cause your dog or your cat to go into a renal disease place, and we don't want that to happen. Or it can cause them to leach calcium out of their bones to match the calcium they need, and that can give them osteoporosis, which might also cause bone fractures or things like that. So canine minerals, feline minerals. The feline minerals has taurine in it, so you don't have to worry about it. My Ultra EFA is a really good quality fish oil from Norway that also has lecithin in it, which is a surfactant that helps to improve the absorption of the fish oil, but also contains choline, phosphatidylcholine, which is really good for the brain, the liver, and the nerves. Vitamin D3, I think that's an essential nutrient for dogs and cats. They don't get it from the sunlight. Unlike humans, dogs and cats don't convert with sunlight, so we have to provide it in their diet. And there's many diseases that we can link to low vitamin D levels. RXzyme is a digestive enzyme, so many of these commercial foods, they're just so highly processed they're not digested very easily. So that's where the RXzyme comes in, and the RX Essentials is basically a multivitamin, multi-mineral powder that you can blend in with the food. I've created formulas for you to use to help balance your homemade diets, because that's what I was into 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and I'm still into it, because it's really important. Common feeding mistakes I see in practice and how to avoid them. Well, I think kibble's the most common feeding mistake. Feeding too much and too often. We had the obesity epidemic is everywhere, but people give love by giving food. And in some person's minds, feeding and food and eating is a source of comfort and support, and it's hard to change those kinds of habits. But you don't. The studies have shown that overweight pets don't live as long. Same with people. So if you want your pet to live as long as you do, watch your pet's weight at least. So, and by the way, you don't have to feed them twice a day. Feeding them once a day. Now, if they're already getting it twice a day, they're going to get a little bit nervous if you're not feeding them twice a day. But you can give them a treat, or maybe one of those animal parts, like the ears that have hair on them, or the tails or things, instead of a meal. And that gives them something to do. Also, these days, they're doing a lot of what they call environmental enrichment. So instead of just feeding in a bowl, they feed them on these flat mats that look like a maze. And so the animal has to kind of work their way through it to get their meal. And it, keeps them interested, because animals are hunters, so for them, it kind of makes their life more exciting to have a game to work at getting their food that way. So feeding once daily, I feed Ollie once daily. It's the same thing as intermittent fasting, and it's been proven to promote longevity in your pet and in humans as well. Humans should also just eat once a day, pretty much. So at least several days a week. So, but only feeding kibble and not adding supplements to improve its poor nutritional levels and its over-processing, that's also a feeding mistake. Oils are really important. I think flaxseed meals are great nutrient because, as I've mentioned, fish oil, very essential. The fatty acids in fish oil are good for almost every system in the body. You just have to feed enough of it continuously for it to have its benefits. And then antioxidants and mushrooms and cranberry and colorful fresh veggies and berries like blueberries and raspberries, or an antioxidant product as well, because so many of these kibbles are just have a lot of oxidative stress in them. Okay, the last thing that I want to talk about, because if you're going to be making the food for your pet yourself, or even whatever you're feeding, you want to feed their ideal body weight. Okay, well, that's a nice thing to say, but how do you know what their ideal body weight is? Well, there actually is a really cool way of assessing it just physically. It's not a matter of how much they weigh, it's how they look. And I've got two charts on the next slide I want to show you, one for cats, one for dogs. But basically, the things that you do is you want to run your fingers alongside the rib cage. And in dogs, especially, you want to be able to feel those ribs. You don't want them starkly outlined, but you don't want them cushioned with a layer of fat. So that's good. If you look at your dog from the top view, you want to see just behind the rib cage that it kind of goes in. They actually have a waistline instead of it being bloated out there. And if you look at them from the side, you don't want to see their abdominal wall just flat. You want to see it also come up into a waistline in the back. And those are the things that we use to judge their body condition score, which is what we call it. And then I have on this slide a formula for dogs. The formula for cats is a little more complicated, but you take the body weight in kilograms and you multiply it by 30, and then you add 70. And that tells you about how many calories it needs total per day, but that's pretty much for weight loss. If you've got a really active dog, a young dog that's very active, maybe he does agility and things like that, he might need twice as much as that. But for dogs that are overweight, this is how much you want to feed. And maybe even feed less than this in order to get their weight down. Right now, I've been spoiling Ollie too much. He's got too much weight on him. So I'm using this formula, and I'm actually feeding him 50% of this because he's got such bad hip problems that if he continues at the weight that he is and he can't get up, I might have to let him go, and I don't want to do that. So let me show you the next slide, and then we'll get to the questions, and you can come up with new questions about everything I've said here. But as you can see on the left side, we split the dog condition scores into 5 different levels. And the first one, they're basically emaciated. And their ribs are starkly outlined. You can almost see their abdominal organs. They're so thin. And the number two is slightly better, maybe not bad. You might see that it's not a bad condition to have. Ideal weight is number three, which matches the description that I've just given you. And then you start to get more padding over those ribs and a loss of waistline, loss of the waistline, and that's where you see the four and the fives. Likewise with the kitties, the body score one, the ribs, the spine, and bony protrusions are easily seen even at a distance. Two, they're starting to get, they're easily felt, but they're not quite as easy to see from a distance. Three is ideal. The ribs and spine are easily felt, but not necessarily seen. And there's a waistline when viewed from above, and the abdomen is raised and not sagging. So this can help you figure out where your animal's at, and if you do need to do something regarding weight loss. But you definitely need to feed based on what their weight is, what their ideal weight is. You can't just well, I think they're still hungry. I mean, dogs are hungry even if they don't really need to eat more. They like to look at us with those brown eyes and make us feel really guilty that they need to be fed. Anyway, that's it for the slides. I hope that was helpful to everyone. And like I said, we'll have a copy of this available to you with some links when we send you the recording out in a couple of days. And I'm going to stop the share, and we can begin the interactive part here.
Sure. So we have a few questions from email here that we can start out with.
Okay.
So first question, I have two younger dogs and would like to know what supplements Dr. Silver would recommend for overall health and wellness. A lot of supplements have herbs in them that state they should only be used short term. Any thoughts on the fermented greens that are being advertised?
Well, as I mentioned, I think fermented foods can be really good. This is general. I'd have to look at the exact brand and everything else, but I think fermented greens are good. As I mentioned, fermented mushrooms, fermented goat's milk. Those are very popular these days. And most herbs can be fed on a regular basis. And there are a lot of products. I don't know the details, of this person's animals' questions. And because I'm in the mushroom space these days and really loving it, my suggestion would be to look at the Daily Dog for dogs or the Functional Feline for cats, because they have 13 ingredients in each, including live probiotic cultures and adaptogens and 7 mushrooms and even marine lipids from the krill meal that's in there. The nutritional support for dogs and cats that I mentioned a couple of slides ago, which was my first product that I ever formulated, I still think is one of the best general products out there, because it has so many of these superfoods and these whole food concentrates as compared to isolated vitamins and minerals. So those are the sorts of things that I think you should look for, and I probably need to know more about your critters to be able to give you a more specific idea, but I hope that's helpful.
So next question, I have a 17-year-old black lab mix who is
Wow.
muscle wasting as she has lost weight this past year, even though we still do several daily walks throughout the day. She was 55 pounds and is now 40 pounds. She was never food motivated, though I do feed her mostly a raw meal and cooked salmon diet with small amount of fruits and veggies as tolerated, with EFAs, coconut oil, probiotics, and fish oils. Looking for a safe appetite stimulant, I do give her CBD and ashwagandha as she has some arthritis.
Well, first I would want to look to make sure you're feeding enough calories. If that's a lot of weight loss. But 17 years old as a lab is pretty amazing. I've almost never seen them that old. I'm lucky if my labs will live to 12 or 13. So that's a real blessing right there. A mushroom that I would recommend would be the cordyceps mushroom, which is really good for geriatrics and has kind of an anabolic effect because it can stimulate testosterone production in the body. As far as an appetite stimulant, I'm not sure can give you one that is definitely that, but you may want to try cooking the meat it might actually work better. Raw food isn't always the best, and as they age, digestive function may not work so well, so raw food may be more difficult to break down, you know. So you might want to try cooking it, see what happens there in terms of appetite. You also might want to try adding some carbohydrates. Carbohydrates aren't evil, and they could also help them when properly fed and not in large amounts. And you might want to look at carbohydrates that are part of, like squash, butternut squash, yams. I think well, yams aren't squash, but I think squash is a great source of carbohydrates and fiber. And it might be that your dog needs a little more of those, and it might be changing the diet around, warming it up a little bit. Doing some things like that might make it more interesting to them. The CBD is good that you're doing that, and that can maybe help for pain. We don't really find that cannabis does the same thing for dogs in terms of the THC that it does for humans in terms of the munchies. But I've heard mixed reviews, and so I'm not suggesting you try THC, because for an older dog like that lost that much weight, the THC could wind up being more toxic than beneficial. But I would try those simple things. You might want to look at the daily dog, as a source. But I think for a geriatric like you're describing, I would say the cordyceps is probably a good way. You can buy that as a bulk pouch from my website, or you can buy it online from Real Mushrooms. But give those a try and get back to us. Let us know how that works. I'd be interested in seeing. That's the frustration with this kind of environment is, in when I was in practice, I'd see the animal, I could give much more precise advice, but I'd also see them come back, and oftentimes we do acupuncture, which is great because you can do it weekly, so they come back every week. You really develop a close relationship, personal relationship with the pet parent, learn a lot, and I kind of miss that, although I don't really have that. It's not part of my life anymore. I have some arthritis in my fingers. I can't really do needling anymore in as accurate a way as I used to. Anyway, next question.
All right, next question. I have a 75-pound yellow lab who is my service dog. He has had many allergies and intolerances to proteins and veggies. He is on my pet carnivore, raw pork and raw herring. I have done multiple tests and still waiting for the Nutriscan results I sent in a couple weeks ago. He
Okay.
also has become more reactive to sound in some people, which he cannot do as a service pup. She does say she did have one email with you, wondering what to do with his continued scratching. So that's another, symptom that they're dealing with here. His
Mhm.
stools are perfect, ears also very clean. Did have a yeast ear infection twice in the past, one on kibble and raw beef. Do you think he could have a leaky gut as well?
He very well may, and we have some testing that we can do for that. But I'm more prone to just treating it, versus than testing for it. But yeah, I recall the email exchange and the amount of pork that this person was feeding, and I was kind of questioning that. I think I'd be very interested in seeing the Nutriscan results when you get them. I think of all of the food allergy testing that's out there, the Nutriscan is probably the best and gives us the best information. Um, and there may be some food allergies in there. The fact that there were goopy ears before, goopy ears oftentimes does denote a food allergy. The increasing reactivity, that's a bit of a concern, and not quite sure exactly where to go with that. The CBD can be helpful, as can something like my mushroom chews, or our Nutricalm, which is an RX Vitamins product that has tryptophan and some other calming herbs in it. Um, so I'm not sure I'm answering that question adequately. It's multiple parts, um, but I think that's about the best I can do as far as at this point in time, with those multiple problems. Yeah. And I think those were my suggestions I made by email as well.
Sure. So next question here. How might I add taurine to my kitty's diet?
Well, you can find online a source of taurine. There used to be a company that sold it in a wide mouth jar that was powder with a scoop that made it easy. I don't think they do it anymore. So, but taurine's widely available as a supplement. You can get in capsules, and you can just open a capsule. For a cat that's an adult cat, probably 100 milligrams daily is really all they need. Kittens need more. They need about 250 milligrams a day. But you can also feed mice. They're very high in taurine. And you can also feed tuna fish, which is also high in taurine. That's a much easier approach to do that. So, and that's, people that feed their cats dog food, find, that used to do that, the cats would go blind because the taurine is really essential for the for the maintenance of the retina. And without the taurine, without the taurine being provided in the food, as they now do in all these commercial diets, because of that, when you feed dog food, you don't get as much. But if you've been following some of the news about the grain-free diets creating a form of heart disease in dogs, the thinking is that these grain-free diets are also too low in taurine. So I believe what many of the pet food companies have done is they're adding taurine now to the dog food. So it may be that if you feed and I'm not suggesting you do this, but it may be if you were to feed a dog food to your cat that it wouldn't go blind. But who wants to take that chance? So that's what I would suggest.
Our next question. My girls eat commercial raw and gently cooked diets and take several of your mushroom supplements. They both
Yeah.
have a low urine pH and one has oxalate crystals. Could any of the mushroom supplements be lowering their pH? What can be added to make their urine more alkaline?
You said the urine was acidic and they have oxalate crystals.
Yes, they both have a low urine pH. One has oxalate crystals.
Okay. So, and the presence of the crystals doesn't necessarily mean stones and doesn't necessarily mean pathology. Um, but what we typically use as far as a medication to alkalinize the urine is something called magnesium or potassium citrate, which can be gotten as a supplement and then can be mixed in with the food. Whether the mushrooms are, oftentimes it's a very individual reaction with that animal's metabolism and whatever you're feeding. Now, we've been, with my work with real mushrooms and my work with this website, we've been selling a lot of mushrooms to a lot of cat owners, and this is the first time I've heard that particular problem. So I'm not certain that I would blame the mushrooms, but it's a very individual thing based on the individual metabolism. So, uh, so that's the best I can do as far as I don't know of a specific food that you could feed or something that doesn't seem like it's a synthetic, you know, um, mineral like potassium citrate. But it's very safe, and it's the citrating of the potassium that makes it go alkaline, and is what helps to reduce the oxalate crystals. Now if you take that urine and you make it too alkaline, then they're going to start forming struvite crystals. It's like you can't win. So what I would do in my practice is we would send people home with little pH strips. Remember, like in high school chemistry, you had these little strips that you dip them in something, they'd turn a color, you could match it on the package. So we would find we had pH strips that would go like from 5.5 to like 7.5, and then we would dip that in the urine if we could. Now with a cat, the best way to do that is after they've been in the box and they've urinated, which most people know when they do that. The hairs that are around the prepuce on their penis, or the hairs that are around their vulva, will still have a drop or two of urine on them. So if you can catch the critter, long enough to just touch the paper to that drop of urine that's on their hair, you can then get an estimate as far as the pH. Apparently, they also make litters now that have that indicator in them, which is another way of figuring that out. I kind of like the pH strip, but I'm an old timer, I'm an old fashioned guy. But that's what I would do. I'm sorry, I don't really know of something that seems less like a like a drug, then it's not a drug, but it's citric acid that is mixed with a potassium chloride, and then you wind up with potassium citrate. So it's not really that big a deal. It's very safe. Next.
Next question. My cats are on functional feline. Does it have any
Yay.
effect on the gut, or do I need to keep them on pre-probiotics?
Well, mushrooms are prebiotics themselves. The fiber in mushrooms is one of the best prebiotics there is that can help to stimulate, you know, good quality microbiome function. And the functional feline also has an incredibly great probiotic in it called Saccharomyces boulardii, which is a yeast-based probiotic that is stable at room temperature, and has been. We don't have any studies in cats. Cats are kind of the underserved population when it comes to many of these studies. But in dogs, they found that Saccharomyces boulardii helps dogs that get diarrhea from antibiotic use, and also can help with leaky gut and things like that. So in many ways, I think that the daily dog and the functional feline formula, someone mentioned leaky gut earlier, also can be very good for those animals who may have leaky gut.
All right, next question. Do you have any diet recommendations for a cat turning 1? I've heard open farm, origin, but am unsure.
Um, well, again, that's kind of why we're getting started here today. Um, Open farm, I really don't want to have an opinion yet because I'm still trying to develop that opinion by doing some studying and research. But I think for a kitten, I think it's great that or young cat. I think it's great to not feed them the kibble. I think that's one of the things that happens. When these cats, when they're just little kittens and they just wean them, and the first thing they do is they put them on kibble, they almost become junk food junkies. And they recognize it's like those little ducks that imprint on the first thing they see when they hatch, and if they see a person, they kind of follow the person around. And so I think that. Starting early and not just feeding kibble is what can allow your cat to have a more flexible palate in terms of what it eats. My cats, this is how we started our cats out, was by feeding raw food, feeding homemade food. In fact, initially I fed a prey diet to my cats, and a prey diet is, in this case, it was quail. We would buy quail from a game bird producer in the Pacific Northwest, not cheap. They would come frozen, dead, in a box of 100, and we'd put them in the freezer, and then we'd thaw them out and skin them, peel the feathers off. And my first set of cats, they just would eat them just the way they was. These new cats, we would cut the quail up, and they would love eating it. Now, with avian flu being so potentially toxic to cats, we stopped feeding birds because quail can carry the avian flu. So now we're feeding our cats primal. I think they prefer the pork over the other flavors. So I think there's a lot of good choices out there, and I don't think you can go wrong getting started with either of the ones that you recommended in terms of answering this question. But I will be vetting these. Here's the vet vetting them, and subsequent. Episodes of this live, especially once I develop a relationship with, because I'm not just going to choose one. I'll probably choose 3 or 4. Because I don't think there's any one meal or any one diet or pet food that is the best. I think each one has things of value and has things that are also a problem. So, well, that cat's really in your face, isn't it, Burb? He's just always like right in front of you. Onyx. Anyway, okay. So next question.
All right, next question. Your thoughts on HPP? My dogs refuse it.
Well, I'm not sure why your dogs refuse it. We got this question earlier. HPP is high pressure pasteurization, and this was a solution that many companies found to the potential of raw diets carrying foodborne pathogens. And the HPP uses high pressure to kill bacteria, to kill pathogens that are in the food. And the biggest complaint from the raw food purists is that it destroys the enzymes in the raw food. Because the concept that the raw food purists have, and I might get myself into trouble here, but I'm going to just speak my truth, is that it destroys the enzymes in the food, and many raw food advocates believe that the enzymes in the raw food are really what improves its digestion and its value to the patient. Now, there's a problem with that because when you chew the food, or the animal chews the food, or if they chew it at all, but once it gets into the stomach, there's a lot of stomach acid. And the stomach acid is an important part of the digestive process, but one thing the stomach acid will do is it denatures enzymes. So it causes the pepsinogen, which is in the stomach, which is a protein digesting enzyme, to be activated, the stomach acid, but it will destroy other enzymes that are in the food. So I personally don't think that the enzyme nature of the raw food is the important thing. I think the important thing about the food that you feed is that it's minimally processed, and you can kitchen cook food, use kitchen temperatures to cook food lightly and destroy possible bacterial pathogens or viral pathogens if you're cooking chicken in terms of avian flu for your cats. And I don't think it's going to upset the overall digestive process and the health that a wholesome diet like that brings. So high pressure processing is, well, the question is, if high pressure processing is so bad for pet food, why is it, why is there a difference between high pressure processing of kibble as compared to high pressure processing of raw? And see, I don't think high pressure processing of raw is bad for it. And I think if you don't have the risk or worry of foodborne pathogens, I think that can be a good thing, especially if you don't. Now, at the same time, you can feed raw foods, and if you handle the raw foods well and you don't let them warm up to room temperature too much, you're also going to get a minimal impact of the foodborne pathogens. And many animals have the ability to deal with foodborne pathogens. If you grew up on a farm or a ranch and you see some of the things that your dogs are eating on that ranch, which are, and my Ollie likes to go across the street where the horses are, and, he likes to eat all those, all the poop of the horses. So, I mean, dogs have a much more vigorous immune system and a digestive immune system than humans do. So they are more resistant to these foodborne pathogens as well. But I understand why they do the HPP, and I don't think that it really destroys the raw food the way the high pressure processing does in kibble. With kibble, you have high temperatures and high pressures, and you put them through this device that was invented by Purina in 1950. That's an extrusion device. So it takes this kind of slurry of all this heated stuff that's got the carbs and the meats, and the meats in commercial foods have probably been processed 3 times before they get to be processed the last time. So, and oftentimes many of the ingredients that are in kibble have been rejected for human use, or are the waste from human food processing as well. So they get processed multiple times. So I mean, you really are processing the holy heck out of the kibble. You're only applying this cold, high pressure to the raw food in such a way as to kill the pathogens. And so I think that it's so. Anyway, and of course, whatever your belief system is, go ahead and follow through with that. If you believe that and I'm not saying that it doesn't, but if you believe that the raw food that is high pressure processed is a problem, and you only want to feed raw food that isn't, fine. Just handle it properly. Get the food fresh, keep it refrigerated. Watch surfaces in the household that you're preparing the food on, in case it is contaminated with some pathogens, in terms of children, or people are immune compromised in the household. Maybe someone's on chemotherapy or something like that. You got to watch those sorts of things, and some people can pay attention to those details, and some people can't. So there's a lot of choices out there, and there's a choice for everyone. And we just want to make sure that we choose not just the choices that we believe in, but also the choices that are appropriate for our pet's health. And there's not any one single food that is appropriate for all pets' health. We have to really, and that's the essence of holistic medicine. Really, is not all these natural things, but being precise and individual with what your recommendations are for that one animal, because everybody's different. Everyone has biochemical individuality. Even though we have a lot of similarities, we're all unique and individual. All right. Anyway, I hope I didn't turn off anybody with that answer. But it is a question that comes up for you. And so, are there more questions now?
Yeah, there's a few more here.
Good.
So my 10-year-old border collie is now suffering from seizures, suffering approximately 3 or 4 seizures a month. Is there
Mm.
anything you suggest?
Well, have you seen your veterinarian? 4 or 5 seizures a month is not a good number to have. Seizures can be very toxic. They can be damaging to the brain, and even though we don't like the drugs that we use, that we put them on with seizures, 4 or 5 seizures a month is too many to have. There aren't any natural therapies that can routinely reduce seizures, but there are some that it's worth a try. So that being said, and I hope you hear my advice, I really do think you should take the dog to a veterinarian and at least hear what they have to say or give it a try. CBD has been shown to be helpful with seizures, even seizures that are poorly treated with pharmaceuticals. But it's not as good as it is not as reliable as pharmaceuticals, but it's a good place to start. You might have to use a very high dosage of CBD. One of the most recent studies went as high as 5 milligrams of CBD for every kilogram of body weight twice daily given with food. So that would be one place to start. The reishi mushroom has been shown to be very beneficial for helping with epilepsy. Maybe not as a standalone therapy, nor is CBD a standalone therapy, but those are a couple of choices that you can do. The use of medium chain triglycerides alone, adding to the food, whether you're feeding kibble or a homemade diet, the medium chain triglycerides go right to the brain and have a very good effect in slowing down and reducing the seizure activity. So those are three things you can try, but with seizures that frequency, it is potentially a life-threatening condition, and I think you need to see somebody.
All right, next question here. Any advice for 11-and-a-half-year-old Australian Shepherd Golden Mix just recently diagnosed with kidney cancer? I have him on turkey tail and have upped the dosage to 1,000 milligrams per day. He weighs 45 pounds. No extreme measures, just providing care and love until he shows me other signs that it is time. Thank you for any information.
Okay, I'm sorry to hear that. That's terrible when that happens. Golden retrievers, as we know, do commonly get cancer. We're still trying to figure out why that is with retrievers and with both retrievers, the Goldens and Labs. And I don't know what product you're using as far as 1,000 milligrams a day with turkey tail, but that's not enough. And I would add to that the cordyceps mushroom, which is specific for the kidneys and has a very good effect on cancer. And I would bump that dosage up to as high as your dog will tolerate and as high as your budget can handle. And I think with those circumstances alone, you may be able to forestall the inevitable much longer than anyone would consider. There's other things certainly you can do. Fish oil is known to be very helpful with that as well. There's Chinese herbs. I offer the stasis breaker and the Wei Qi booster, which are some Chinese herbs that can help with cancer as well. So doing a comprehensive program like that, using the medium chain triglycerides to create more of a ketogenic effect, because cancer feeds off of carbohydrates and simple sugars and protein to some extent, does not feed off of fats. So that's why when we use medium chain triglycerides, we give energy to the patient, but we don't give energy to the cancer. So I'm sorry to hear that. It's always so sad when that happens.
Right. How do you know how much vitamin D to give? And since cats in nature eat many small meals whenever they catch it, wouldn't it be good to mimic that and feed them small meals 3 to 5 times a day?
Okay, I'll answer the second question first, which is yes, that's a great idea. And when you think about it, how much is in a mouse, maybe a tablespoon of food. So yes, it's okay if you were to feed your cat multiple meals a day, but they should be very small meals, you know. Otherwise, you're going to get a chubby cat. You don't want that. Um, and then the first question, repeat that, please.
Um,
Haley.
oh, sorry, wait.
It's okay.
Um, okay, how do you know how much vitamin D to give?
Oh, okay, vitamin D. So we don't know how much vitamin D to give because each animal is very individual. So the recommend and at the same time, vitamin D is very important. There's a vitamin D test that VDI Labs does. We used to sell it on our website, but um, then we got into some problems with veterinarians getting kind of pissy with us about it. Um, but I would go, but for vitamin D, you need to test first. There's no other way to know how much to give because vitamin D can be toxic at pretty high levels. It's better to know how much to test. So VDI Labs, it's a blood test, can test the blood and can tell you actually how much vitamin D to give your animal in order to bring it up to